They stood their ground and lost their jobs. 2,000 New York State corrections officers terminated Monday after an illegal 3-week strike.
And today, one of them spoke with Tony Aiello about losing his job and now facing possible contempt of court charges.
Governor Kathy Hochul is trying her absolute best to be the worst governor in the entire country. Now, of course, Governor Gavin Newsom has her beat as of right now, but she is right on his heels, trying to do as much terrible policy as humanly possible. And like you just heard right there, they have now fired in the state of New York 2,000 corrections officers who were striking illegally, by the way, in part due to the fact that, guess what? They are criminally understaffed, the prisons are incredibly dangerous, and a bunch of different various woke criminal justice reforms have been instituted that are completely impractical and unworkable on the ground. Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Sean, and we're going to give you an update to this prisoner strike situation because I think it is one of the most crucial and overlooked stories in the entire country. But before we break that all down, I want to say thank you to everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay.
We have talked about the prison guard strike that is going on in the state of New York a couple of different times on this channel, and it needs to be made 100% clear for all of you guys out there in the audience that this is not a money-related strike. In fact, one of the offers that Governor Kathy Hochul put on the table to get these workers back into the prison was to pay them 2.5 times for overtime. Typically, overtime pay is time and a half, and to try to limit, which is a joke by the way, the amount of shifts they could be forced to work back to back to back to a total of 36 hours in a particular week, which of course is a ridiculous number of shifts. It's 4 shifts in a row, a full day plus 8 hours. It's absolutely absurd.
There was literally nothing in there that's applicable, that wasn't asked for, and resolves any of our issues.
A resounding no. That's the response I heard at Attica, Wyoming, and Wendy correctional facilities to whether they think the offer posed by the state will convince corrections officers to return to work.
I apologize for laughing.
The general consensus is that it was an insult, a slap in the face.
They're all unhappy.
I think this membership feels insulted by this deal.
That deal includes a 90-day suspension of the HALT Act, which limits solitary confinement, followed by a review to see if it can be safely restored. A 4-shift maximum on mandated overtime, no internal discipline for striking, however Taylor law fines still apply, and multiple chances for increased pay for working overtime, referring workers, and being excessively mandated, as long as they return by Saturday.
But this is all the consequence of policy from Governor Kathy Hochul that has closed prisons across the state in order to save money, and of course has reduced the ability for these guards in order to initiate discipline against these prisoners through laws like the HALT Act, which of course were passed post George Floyd, post the Black Lives Matter fervor, and have been absolutely disastrous. And the number one thing that these corrections officers want, as they've told us time and time again, is not more money, it is to repeal the HALT Act. But instead, Governor Kathy Hochul is not only firing these guards, she's not only not going to hire enough people to replace them to fix the understaffing issue, she's going to make it worse, but in addition to that, she's asked for new authority to close even more prisons so that the remaining prisons can be even more overcrowded.
I just want to affect change, positive change, and whatever form, method that may be.
For Bronx native Jelani Sandiford, taking a stand for change meant risking the job he's held since graduating from the Corrections Academy in 2013. He's one of 2,000 correction officers fired for participating in the Wildcat strike at almost 40 state prisons, and one of almost 400 COs facing contempt charges. New York law forbids strikes by public workers.
I know what I'm fighting for, and I'm not going to be bullied. I'm not going to be, made a mockery of. So I will go to court. I will do what I have to do.
So right here, we have one of the corrections officers that is speaking to the press, and he is at risk of contempt charges because in the state of New York, and by the way, basically every state in the union, it is actually illegal for police officers, for corrections officers, for anybody who works in critical law enforcement to go on strike while on the job, because obviously leaving a community unprotected or the prisons in disarray is something that is a huge problem. But because of the safety issues issues in the New York State prisons, again, caused by the Democratic legislature, these woke politicians who don't want to prosecute anyone for anything, who want to move forward with a prison abolitionist agenda. They decided to risk it all, ignore the plans to pay them more money in order to do their jobs, in order to get the critical change that they need. And for those of you guys who are unaware, the HALT Act essentially limits the amount of solitary confinement that you can utilize against somebody to about 2 weeks for a time period. It also has a cap for the amount of time you could put them in solitary during the course of an entire year. And in addition to that, it bars completely you being able to use these disciplinary tactics against inmates that are under the age of 21. So for some reason, even though these people are legal adults, by the way, they're in the middle of their peak offending years, if they're problematic inmates, you can't actually discipline them at all whatsoever in any kind of serious way. And that creates a bunch of different problems for these corrections officers, who of course are understaffed. They are also overworked. So they're understaffed, overworked, and in more and more danger. And in addition to that, the governor is moving forward with plans to close more prisons. And the reason why they're saying we have to close these prisons is due to the fact that they're not occupied anywhere near close to full capacity. But the thing is, them not being occupied close to full capacity would actually increase safety. It would actually be better for the inmates. And the idea that you would close it and then overcrowd the remaining prisons makes no sense at all. And again, we see the results of these policies. We have a 75% increase in violence against other inmates. We have a 30+% increase in some metrics, by the way, it's even higher, of violence against corrections officers. And this is all due to the HALT Act being passed, which again was a ridiculous woke criminal justice reform that the Democrats are standing by, and they're willing to fire corrections officers and hold a bunch of them in contempt of court in order to maintain these woke policies. They don't care about the employees. This is not a situation where these people want more money. And I find it absolutely shameful that while you definitely need more prison guards, while you definitely need to open these particular prisons, Governor Kathy Hochul is basically saying no to all these people, saying get back to work, enjoy the terrible conditions that we are constantly making worse, while at the same time she is rewarding the MTA, which is New York City's transit authority, which of course is run absolutely disastrously, wastes billions upon billions of dollars with all these different various new taxes. Again, if you run the subway system into the ground, then you get rewarded with it, you get more money for it. However, if you're run into the ground by the Democratic state legislature because you're trying to guard the people that we don't want in our society, that we need removed from our society, guess what? You get punished. You get put in contempt of court. You don't get the resources that you need, and you get to be attacked for your troubles while on the job.
The strikers complained prison discipline reforms known as the HALT Act have led to a dramatic spike in assaults on correction officers. That's one reason recruiting has tanked, leading to mandatory overtime.
24-hour shifts, 36-hour shifts. I'm not going to be able to be the parent that I could be, the father that I can be to my children, because I'm barely seeing them, because I'm not even able to respond to them appropriately, because I'm so tired, because I'm agitated, because I'm dealing with things that I'm seeing in prison. These are the situations that we've tried to highlight for years, and they haven't been addressed.
Again, these complaints aren't unreasonable, and especially considering the fact that these corrections officers have repeatedly turned down more money from the state of New York, more overtime pay, and all that stuff. You understand that this is about safety, and it's also about family. One of the most tragic signs that I've seen related to these strikes is the fact that a bunch of these guards are holding up signs saying that the inmates get to see their families more than they do, and you can understand why that's the case when you have a mandatory 24-hour shifts as the norm, mandatory 36-hour shifts as the norm. And even though the money has increased, it's not all about the money for this particular set of workers. And that's one of the things that I find to be absolutely honorable about them, because they're not just trying to settle on the 2.5 times overtime pay or anything of the sort. They want more guards. They want more safety. They just want to stop being attacked. And I think for a public sector union, even though this is not an authorized union strike, to actually advocate for the workers is so rare in this country and not try to extort the taxpayers for more and more money. I find them to be very honorable, and I think that they should have their support, because in reality, these people are needed. We have a criminal justice system that is based on the idea of incapacitation. People who reoffend constantly in our state, in our society, need to be removed from society. They need to be incarcerated in order to prevent them from victimizing people further. These are the people who watch those people. These are the people who guard our society from their return, and reducing their numbers and forcing them into overtime and forcing them into more and more danger when we know there are things that we can do in order to make their jobs easier should be a top priority for the state government, especially when New York State is putting out a $260 billion budget, $260 billion for a state that, by the way, has less population than the state of Florida, who runs their entire state on $116 billion, but they don't have enough to actually enforce what needs to be enforced within our prisons to recruit the appropriate number of people. And it's completely understandable why, no matter how much money they're offering, people just don't want to become corrections officers, because it is clear that the New York State legislature, the super majority Democrat state legislature, has the criminals back over these particular guards. Remember, these are the oppressive law enforcement people. Look at this guy right here, this black man from the Bronx. He's obviously a white supremacist. We need to cut their benefits, force them to work more overtime, subject them to more brutalization in order to protect the innocent Bebe Angel prisoners who all they did was repeat offend time and time again, to the extent that they actually ended up in a New York State prison. Because remember, all of this occurs at the same time as bail reform, where we're not holding people accountable. We have all these Soros DAs that are never pursuing incarceration as a punishment, but we set that aside and we say, oh, well, even in these particular scenarios, when they are the worst of the worst, when they can still be held accountable, we're not going to police them properly within the prison and subject the workers of that prison to multiple different attacks.
Sandiford says he understands why many COs chose to return to work. He'll live off savings for now and wait for what develops.
Now look, obviously many of these corrections officers ended up going back to work. The strike was much, much larger at certain points in time. 9 out of 10 guards were not in the prisons. They actually had to deploy the National Guard, which, by the way, the National Guard that was in the prisons described the conditions of these prisons for, again, the workers of the prisons as worse than what they faced in the Middle East during wartime. But yeah, this guy has decided that he is going to stand on principle. He's going to try to live off savings. And unfortunately, he has a lengthy court battle where he has to fight against the contempt charges where he might be jailed, which again, if he was jailed in the state of New York, then maybe, just maybe, he would have more rights than being on the other side as a corrections officer, because it is clear and obvious that the state of New York wants to protect the prisoner and protect their right to be violent towards other prisoners, which of course puts the prisoners in more danger than they would have been under the previous laws, because God forbid we ever hold these people accountable. That would be evil white racism, and honestly, you need to shut up with your evil white racism.
Or do you think there could be another twist in this story?
The twist that's coming, I don't know, but it has to involve those of us who left coming back.
Some think the state may be so desperate for correction workers, it may rehire some of those it let go.
So what's crazy is what you heard right there, is that even post the strike, even post holding some of these strikers in contempt, post firing these 2,000 guards, the state of New York is likely to have to hire these corrections officers back into working order, because they are just that short on recruits, and they cannot allow 2,000 guards to just leave the job completely, because that would put the prisons in even more disarray. But of course, Governor Kathy Hochul has decided that she is going to go tough, go hard on these corrections officers, never on the prisoners, by the way, never on the criminals, by the way, never on the MTA, by the way, but on these corrections officers by cutting off their employment, blocking them from unemployment benefits, and doing everything and anything in order to make their lives more difficult as punishment for being upset about how the state of New York and Governor Kathy Hochul has made their lives significantly more difficult.
The governor has taken a very tough line with strikers who didn't return to work, barring them from future state employment and ending insurance for their families.
Now, like I said, normally I am not somebody who is cheering on public sector unions. I find that they often just pay money to Democratic and Republican politicians on the local level in order to get themselves juicy contracts that prevent them from facing any accountability for their actions. And basically, they don't even run the system that they're supposed to be working in any kind of reasonable way. However, this case, this particular instance right here, is the exception that proves the rule, because guess what? They've been offered more money. They've been offered more healthcare benefits, more retirement benefits, all the different various things that the teachers union, that the MTA in the state of New York, and all these other public sector unions that extort money from the taxpayer every couple of years get offered, and they said no. All they want is the ability to perform their job appropriately, the ability to hold dangerous inmates accountable for their actions, and to stop being attacked, and to stop having a state legislature that protects the criminal rather than the prison guard. And this is completely reasonable to me. Again, who wants to do this job? Do you want to do this job? Somebody has to do it. Somebody has to watch the people that are incapacitated, has to maintain this population, has to run this particular prison system, and these are the people that step up to do it. So in this particular case, I think the bare minimum is to not allow the Democrats in the state legislature to micromanage their behavior and actually have these people operate the prisons in a way that is safe, not only for the guards, but for the inmates. Because make no mistake about it, attacks between inmates are up significantly because you have understaffed, underworked police officers or corrections officers in these particular prisons who can't even discipline the repeat offenders within the prison. So the worst of the worst that keep offending after they're incarcerated cannot be punished, cannot face consequences, and it's absolutely shameful. But you know what? Those are just my thoughts. I want to know what you guys think about this down in the comments below. And if you like the video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on the social medias, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about the absolute madness going on in the state of New York. Till next time.